Do you ever play a game and think to yourself, I wish I could fit this in my mouth? What do you mean no? Well, now you can. Introducing the Thumby. Thumby?
Thumby.
Believe it or not, the Thumby is a real functional piece of hardware that's so small I can store it in the battery compartment of an actual Game Boy. It's got a super tiny 1-bit screen, meaning it can only display black and white, and some buttons that are about a single atom wide. Now, is it practical? No, but that's not the point. It's just a wacky little console, and I love handhelds like that. Just take a look at my shelf. So as a little bit of a game developer myself, I decided to try and put my skills to the test and make a game for the Thumby. Before I made the game though, I thought I would do a couple little tests, just to see how coding for it worked and what I can do with it. So I headed over to GitHub and stole my own particle code, which I then ported over to Python to run on the console. Then I did a simple hello world script, which I probably should have done first. And I also made some sort of a platformer thing, but it didn't get very far before I came up with a better idea. So, sorry, but Game idea time. I've really wanted to play this game called Disc Room for a while. It just looks cool trying to carefully weave your way through wave after wave of saw blades, which is why I decided to make a ripoff, completely original game that happens to be similar to Disc Room, but for safe measure, I'll call it Disc Dungeon instead. So I started off by looking at the documentation and getting really confused because I haven't used Python in a while. Then I figured out how to draw a white outline on the edge of the screen and a single pixel that you can move around. Then I wrote some super basic code that checks if you've gone too far off the screen and make sure you don't. It's just like one line of code, it's not that complicated. By the way, the reason I'm using the simulator to record and not footage of the actual device is, you know, it's not very practical to record like this. From this close, you can see the individual hairs on my fingers. Gross. Now I'll give you one guess as to what the game is missing. No, it's saw blades. So I made some really simple pixel art for the saw blades. There's a built-in pixel art tool on the website, which is kind of cool, but I prefer making my own in Sprite, which is still okay since I can import my own files into it. Look at that! You can now die. Well, I guess you can't yet. Not important, we'll get back to that later. I like to make score-based games because they're easier to make and I'm lazy. So that's how I decided to do this game. I added a score counter in the corner here, which ticks up every second, and to add some extra challenge and more of a reason to move around, I added these circle things that add 10 to your score when you touch them. They're coded to just randomly appear and disappear on the screen somewhere. Then I created a nice title screen, again in Sprite, and finally got to coding the collisions, which I hate doing by the way. I don't know why, but I can never get collisions right. There's always jitters or some sort of bugs, or they just don't line up correctly. Which is also why I didn't bother with making proper collisions for rocket bites. You just bump into stuff and you die. But I eventually got it good enough and stole the same particle system to make everything look a bit nicer. And here's the game. But I can't just leave you off here. This game is way too small. You're here to see me make something big, so since it hasn't been very long, why don't I make another game? So how about, yeah. In case you somehow weren't aware, Siman is a memory game where it shows you a sequence of button presses and you have to try and memorize it and repeat it back, which is a bit of a problem for me and my goldfish memory. Now, this shouldn't really be too hard to replicate, so don't leave, don't go. I'm gonna explain code, but it'll be really simple, I promise. So first, I hacked into the mainframe, enabled the photosynthesis reactor core, then I made a list of button inputs. If you press them in order, then I add another one to the end of the list. Don't know what you were expecting, it's not that complicated. With all that behind the scenes stuff, this is technically a functional game, but you can't actually see anything, like, at all. I have to make some sort of way to show the pattern to the player, and then show them when they inevitably get the pattern wrong. So I drew a circle, divided it into 4 sections, redid all that because I realized I did it wrong, and then I colored in each section to show you which ones would press. On the original Siman, each button makes a different sound, so I went to my Siman to figure out what sounds I should map to each button. Yeah, those are definitely the same. That was useless. Apparently mine is dumb and only has 2 sounds. Why they did that, I'm not entirely sure, but because of that, I ended up just picking a few pitches to play for each button. Then I stole the same particle code from the first game because, as I said, I'm extremely lazy. Mocked up a little menu in Sprite because I just randomly decided I wanted to be organized for once, which is very out of character. and I split it up into individual sprites for me to place on the title screen, and wow, okay. After making the menus, this game in total took me less time than the first one. It only took 1 day instead of the 2 or 3 that the last one took. You know, I could make another game, but at a certain point, maybe it's better to just stop. But it doesn't feel right making a game that's smaller than any of my last ones. It feels like I'm going backwards and not learning or growing. But maybe it's okay to relax and make a smaller game for a small console. It's better than forcing myself into some kind of loop. Spending half a year making a game before disappearing for another just because I don't feel like I've made something big enough to be worth sharing. So, you know what? I'm proud of the games I made. Anyway, join my Discord server, like, subscribe, and give me money if you want with the join button, and thanks to my channel members Jace and Dark Illusion.
Bye.